So let me just check the stream. Yep. Again, there we are. We are live. Biba Biba. Half a day todos hamzu gwena hodzung. Half a day, half a day. This is a new episode of Fanachu. Wahui host Midzu Tatlu inanhu si Michaelu Han Bavakwa. Hungan and I am fresh off a fest pack. Do I have a fest pack tan? Do I have a tan that looks like it comes from 25 different Pacific Island nations? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But after being in Hawaii for 10 days and seeing and connecting with so many others, I felt like for June, we need a lot of solidarity. We need to reach beyond sort of just Guam, and we need to reconnect with others in similar struggles in the Pacific, but also in similar struggles across the United States, the Insular Empire, the United States, and its other territories. And so I was very happy when I reached out to Neil and Adi, Neil Weare, Adi Martinez-Román from Right to Democracy, and I invited them on. They've been on Fanachu before, and I asked them if they would be interested in being on Fanachu this month, and they graciously agreed. Because when I think about solidarity in terms of connections between the US territories today, I think about Right to Democracy, and I think about the work that they are doing. Because for those of you who don't know, if you're listening to Fanachu, then you probably are connected to at least one or two, maybe three, of one of the 5 US territories that are out there. You're probably connected to Guam, which means you're connected to the CNMI, but you may have connections to Puerto Rico, American Samoa, the US Virgin Islands. And so this is the Insular Empire. These are the US territories. And so the group Right to Democracy is working to dismantle American colonialism. And the leaders of this group, the heads of this group, the directors are Neil Weare and Adi Martinez-Román, and they are the guests for Fanachu. Half a day, Neil, and half a day, Adi.
Half a day, buenas.
Hola, buenos
Thank you.
días.
Yes, thank you so much for joining. We are all the way across the United States and its territories in completely different time zones, but I'm so glad that you could join. And Right to Democracy has been doing such incredible work in terms of building a movement to increase self-governance across, and democratic participation, build towards genuine, the right to democracy. It's an election year in the United States, and people are talking about sort of the fate of democracy more and more, especially with things like the Supreme Court making a lot of interesting and possibly scary decisions lately. Where do the territories factor into these? Where do the territories who don't even get to vote for president, where do they factor into this? And so Right to Democracy is all about talking about reminding the United States and its hundreds of millions of citizens that the territories are connected to the United States. And so what about their rights to determine their future? And so I'm happy that you're here because you've got a movement report that you want to talk about. There's also the Department of Justice, which has condemned the Insular Cases. And so you've also been having some great virtual panels that have been connecting Indigenous peoples across the territories. And so you have all been very busy. And so who wants to talk first about what Right to Democracy has been up to?
Yes, before starting, Miguel, thank you so much for having us again here. Very honored to be connecting with all of you across seas, from the Caribbean to the Pacific. I just wanted to, before talking about all the work that we have been doing, address your comment about what's going on in the US today. We have been, working for so long to promote self-determination and equity in the territories. And it's always for us very, I would say, I don't know if the word is ironic, but when we go to conferences where they're talking about defending American democracy, multiracial democracy, and at least for me, it's democracy. Which democracy for whom? Like, where are the territories? Like, it has never been an US democracy for the 5 territories, not in a real sense. And we have felt that deficit for centuries. And it's sad that the US residents are feeling it so harshly now. And we totally identify with that. But I am a little I don't even know the word, but I'm like, see, this is what a democratic deficit looks like. And this is what we have been dealing with for centuries. And this is why we have to work together to promote real equity, real self-determination for all the territories, which will help American US democracy as a whole. And with that,
just
I can
just
leave.
adding on to that, I would say, yeah, it is kind of funny or ironic. You know, people here in the U.S. are saying, "Oh, we don't like these choices. We don't like the choices of these 2 candidates. We don't want to have to choose between just these 2 people." Meanwhile, people in the territories don't have a choice at all whether who the candidate is and who to vote for, or to whether even to be part of the United States to begin with. So, yeah, it's hard to you know, you kind of wish that these conversations about democracy and self-determination for the 3.6 million people living in U.S. territories were a part of these broader conversations at all, but unfortunately too often are left apart from them.
No, thank you. Thank you both so much for providing that important reflection. Because I think this is why most people in the United States don't know much about the insular cases. But when you think about when you think about the insular cases, it really gets at the fundamental nature of the United States. Can the United States, what is the United States' relationship to its own principles and values in terms of its colonial, anti-colonial rhetoric? And sort of the insular cases basically provides for the idea that the United States, of course, can, and the insular cases provided a very racist rhetoric to support the idea that the United States can have colonies, and it could because the people there were less than white Americans at that time, and so the United States needed to protect itself from those people, those alien races that lived in these colonies, the Philippines, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Ladrone Islands, and so on. And so I think let's bring in that discussion now, because I know let's talk a little bit, because I'm still distressed, that the insular cases are not part of, the core curriculum across the United States. But I'm also distressed that even in the territories, sort of the insular cases are not part of core curriculum. And so let's bring in Neil or Addie, whoever would like to just, what are the insular cases? Just so people have a little bit of foundation in understanding what we're talking about before we dive into the DOJ's response to it more recently.
Sure, I can kick it off, and then Addie, feel free to add on. So, as you said, Miguel, the insular cases are the series of early 1900s Supreme Court decisions decided by essentially the same court that decided Plessy versus Ferguson, which justified racial segregation in the United States. And as you said, they broke from the democratic and anti-colonial values of the founding of the United States, where a day away in Guam, 2 days here in the States from July 4th, the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, talking about the consent of the governed, talking about all men are created equal, these kind of broad principles that were a central part of the story of the founding of the United States, and yet so disconnected to the lived experience of people in all of the territories today. And the real breaking point, or the real flip, was this series of Supreme Court decisions that established this racist doctrine of separate and unequal. The Insular Cases held that, quote, half-civilized, savage, alien races living in Puerto Rico, Guam, and other so-called unincorporated territories were not entitled to the same constitutional rights and democratic participation because they were, quote, unfit and could not understand so-called Anglo-Saxon principles. And what's been exciting to see just over the last few years is how there has been a broad cross-ideological, bipartisan, cross-territorial consensus that it is time to turn the page on these racist Supreme Court decisions and the undemocratic colonial framework that they established. So on the one hand, there are specific legal, doctrinal, policy consequences that come out of this. But more broadly, as you said, it was almost this more kind of cultural shift and normalization of this relationship that now has lasted over 125 years. Addie, you want to talk a little more about that?
Sure. I mean, when I talk about the Insular Cases, I go more into the relationship between culture, law, and politics. Because many times traditional lawyering tends to see legal doctrine and legal precedent as scientific formulas that really do not that really do not have a straight connection to politics or to everyday life. But as our professor, Efren Rivera Ramos, very clearly illustrated in his book, The Legal Construction of Identity, these cases create a meaning, a cultural figure, a form of understanding collective life in the territories, in which they establish the legitimacy of unilateral governance of the Congress of the United States over the territories, but also then the colonial relationships that result from that unilateral governance. So the people that live in the territories tend to revere the authority of the imperial powers. There is a tendency to dependence. There is a tendency of always being afraid of losing that link or the benefits that are brought with federal funds, or there is always these things that are developed also in local governance. Economy is always extractive. So there's all these social results that come from the construction of this relationship that is legitimized by a language that was invented in the Insular Cases. And these cases invent language. They invent a concept of incorporated and non-incorporated territories that did not exist before these cases were solved. Before the cases, all the territories of the United States was little by little, invading. Those territories were just called territories. Then when it decides to expand outside of its borders, the insular areas, then it makes this decision saying there are some territories that are incorporated. There are some territories that are unincorporated, and those, the insular areas, are unincorporated because, like you said, its population are savages, are people that are not able to participate in Anglo-Saxon laws and principles, and basically inferior people that would not fit into this new nation. And in that sense, it creates reality, it affects politics, like, and that is for the main reason why for right to democracy, it is so important to confront this doctrine, and that the US government recognizes that this is the language, this is the terms it imposed in this relationship with the territories, and that it should not be so if it's going to call itself a democracy. And so there is this political importance on the reckoning, on the recognition of the existence of this colonial framework in order to be able to solve it, that we insist upon.
And I'd add to just some of the ways that it manifests like on the ground, today, and how it impacts real people's lives. So one of the fights in Congress right now is over whether people in Puerto Rico should be able to enjoy supplemental nutrition assistance program the same way people in Guam do and in the rest of the states do. So if you live in Guam, you have full parity when it comes to the SNAP program. If you live in Puerto Rico, it's a significantly less beneficial program, even as the poverty rate in Puerto Rico is higher than it is in Guam or anywhere else in the United States. And you have members of Congress and staff in Congress saying, oh, Congress can't solve this problem because of the insular cases. It's mistaken. It's not true. But it creates this cultural and political reality where discrimination is the default status. Denial of democracy, denial of democratic rights, denial of self-determination, that's the default that everything is based on. And as Addie said, just this reckoning. If you ask most people in the United States, does the United States have colonies? They would laugh and say, of course not. Our country is not a colonial country. And yet these insular cases persist. This framework that continues to deny self-determination and political rights to people in these areas continues. And that's why we were so excited and why it's so important that the DOJ took the recent action that it did.
Oh man, thank you so much for that discussion there. No, thank you so much. Let's actually let's talk about, I think because I know that for some people who are not, this is why history is so important, because a lot of people forget. They think sort of that, the world that you've been born into, this is the way things are now. And so if the world around you doesn't seem to be particularly terrible, then they can't imagine, well, it couldn't have been that bad before. And so I've really I've seen people on island, for example, argue pretty ferociously that the insular cases has nothing to do with race, which is very strange to me. It's like people who argue, I've also seen similar people argue that slavery had nothing to do with race, which is also like a hysterical sort of thing to argue. But so let's talk about sort of the DOJ condemning the insular cases, because I know that was sort of a big thing. And I know that Right to Democracy provided some commentary on that. And so hold on, I was going to share some where is it? Here we go. So the DOJ agrees insular cases deserve no place in our law. In a historic move, the Department of Justice has announced a department-wide policy not to rely or seek to extend the doctrine of territorial incorporation established by the Insular Cases. Yeah, and so can you talk more about what this means, though? What does it mean for the DOJ to take this position?
Yeah, so this is not something the Department of Justice does often. It's very much a small C conservative institution that doesn't kind of opine on broad issues like this on a regular basis. So this is significant that they're doing so here. A couple things that the Department of Justice said in the letter that are quite notable. One, as you just recognized, establishing this department-wide policy, quote, to not rely on or seek to extend the doctrine of territorial incorporation established by the Insular Cases. And we've actually seen that the department has sent memos to each of the U.S. attorney's offices, informing them and providing guidance on this new policy. And what the Department of Justice said in the letter was that it agreed with members of Congress who wrote them, including Congressman Moylan from Guam, Congressman Plaskett from the NMI, Congressman Sablon from the Northern Mariana Islands, Congressman Gonzalez Colon from Puerto Rico, and about 24 other members of the House and 15 members of the U.S. Senate agreed that, quote, the racist language and logic of the Insular Cases deserve no place in our law. And finally, kind of going to this historical point that you raised, the department said, quote, the department unequivocally condemns the racist rhetoric and reasoning of the Insular Cases and unambiguously shares your view that such reasoning and rhetoric are irreconcilable with foundational American principles of equality, justice, and democracy. So again, the department doesn't take these kinds of actions lightly. And this is something we've been working on for years with a broad array of partners across the territories, national advocacy organizations, bar associations, the Guam Bar Association and other bar associations have been very involved. So it's exciting to see the Department of Justice finally taking this long overdue action. But what's even more exciting is how it opens the door, one, to this kind of recognition and reckoning that there's actually a problem with this undemocratic colonial framework to begin with, which the federal government to date has not really recognized. And two, opens the door for the other branches of federal government to take additional steps towards confronting and dismantling the undemocratic colonial framework in U.S. territories. So it's almost the what's next and what does this open the door to that's as exciting as this historic step that the department took in the first place.
I am very excited and proud of being part of these historic moments together with Neil. And I have to say and recognize this has a lot to do with years and years of his work and relationship building to bring these issues forward. And also in the last year, I think we have potentiated that with the participation of a wider base of collaborators in the United States and from the territories that have made our voices more potent. And I have to also recognize our pro bono partners, Covington and Burling, that for free have been helping us in advocating for the letter from the representatives to the DOJ and strategizing and helping us strategize around this issue. But I have to admit that when we received the letter, we were actually in a learning session in New York City. It was the same day that Trump's 34 convictions came out. And when we received the letter and we read it, at first, I was like, well, it doesn't say the word colony on it. And that was kind of like a bummer for me. But then I was like, let's read it again. And then Neil read it and I read it. And then Neil explained it. And then I explained it. And I was like, oh my God, like they are actually rejecting the racist logic and not to use these cases towards the future. And while that would seem like a very some people called it migajas, how you say it in English, like crumbs that are being given. It's not about the crumbs, it's what you can make with these crumbs. Because like Neil says, you can, like now we have a statement, an official statement from the government of the United States admitting that they racist based on racist arguments solve these cases and that they should not be part of the doctrine. So we could move other instances to make this recognition more powerful. For example, there is no reason why the White House shouldn't express itself along these lines, because its own DOJ department, it's giving the green light to be able to make these expressions of recognition. They can really take a step to be champions, that's the word, to be the champions of something that they have been really promoting in this White House, which is the inclusion of the territories in federal policy discussions and in federal policy programs. Like this has been a distinguishable difference of this White House. So moving for that is a next step that is very powerful. Moving for Congress, again, we got 43 legislators to sign that letter. But now we have a letter from the DOJ that can be used to move other legislators to recognize the undemocratic colonial framework. We have a very good tool, advocacy tool in our hands. And finally, the other power, the judicial power, this letter is also an advocacy tool, because when they use these, or when arguing these cases, we are able to say the own Department of Justice recognize that it's based on racist principles. So it is definitely something that will depend on our actions. It will depend on our collective use of the instrument, and how we are able to keep eroding that, you know, una gota cayendo ahí. It's a drop that keeps falling in the mortar, and it's gonna break it, right? So that's, I think, is definitely a big drop that we can use.
No, Neil, did you want to add to that at all, or?
No, I would just emphasize too how much I think the success is attributable to the new approach we've been taking on these issues, and to the work we've done in the communities in each of the territories, bringing people together through a new coalition, and really working to build a movement that that's always the first step to change, is getting people working together towards a common goal. And we've just seen so much of that over the last year, since Addie and I have been working together with so many partners in Guam, in the Northern Mariana Islands, you know, in each of the territories. And it's just exciting to see that really paying real dividends in terms of action by the federal government to take these issues more seriously, and to actually take steps towards addressing the things that need to be addressed.
No, c'est justement. Thank you for that discussion on that. I mean, it's I I think I agree. It is an important moment because it provides a precedent to, even if to use against, as Addie was saying, you can kind of it's it's finally some recognition on this that can be used for future reference. Well, uh and so I definitely look forward to that. I definitely look forward to that. I know that one of the things that Right to Democracy has also been working on, but before we get to that though, I wanted to share with everyone watching that this is their website, righttodemocracy.us. And so what we're going to talk about now, you can find it here. Their movement report, building a movement report, it is right here under resources. But you'll find some beautiful images from each of the different territories. You'll find information. Um, and so really this is, what I mentioned at the beginning, but, to build a network of islands which are geographically spread across, the United States, basically the United States, it's a difficult task. And many people have tried in the past, and a lot of people have just not tried because it's too daunting. In the past, technology wasn't up to snuff. And so now technology makes it possible. And so we can see that Right to Democracy is absolutely taking advantage of this in terms of, combining virtual opportunities, putting stuff out on social media, but also doing the on the ground work, having listening sessions, having in-person meetings. The virtual does not necessarily do away yet. AI has not completely replaced us. It may someday, but it has not happened yet. The Terminator has not killed Sarah Connor yet, has not killed John Connor yet, for those that understand the Terminator reference. But so please check out their website here. But let's talk about the Building a Movement report. I'm going to share some slides, but who wants to introduce this to everyone?
Yeah, I can start. As Neil was saying, a great deal of what we have achieved in this last year after launching Right to Democracy together has been a result of the relationships and the power that we have built together by creating this movement. And the report is a clear reflection of what we did. By first, it offers quite a bit of good information on the territories. So everybody that wants to go in and take a look at the full report, we're just showing a few pages, but the full report has a whole section of the territories by the numbers. So, and some information about historical background, some information also on what we just talked about, the colonial framework and the insular cases a little bit. And it goes into the values of Right to Democracy that we have already talked about in our last podcast. And it recounts the listening tour. And the listening tour is, I think I still look at it as the most important part for me last year, where I was able with Neil to go around the different territories. That's the section, the power of listening. And we went around the 5 US territories doing these dialogues. And we did 6 dialogues in Puerto Rico, 3 in the Virgin Islands, 3 in Guam, 3 in Northern Mariana Islands, and there were 2 dialogues done in American Samoa. And in all of them, there was one of the dialogues was concentrated on the youth, and other dialogues with other community leaders. And if you scroll down a little bit, Miguel, you'll see that there is a QR code there, and then you have the table. Okay, that's good. That QR code will take you soon enough to a more detailed supplement that is apart from the report, a supplement that goes into what took place in those dialogues in each of the territories. And in this report, we go into what we learned from the themes of colonialism, citizenship, the relationship with the US, and how each territory describes it, and how there is a common content between all of us, and how we were able, and this is something I mentioned in the report, and that really is a way of explaining it. When we were doing the dialogues, we would take notes in these big white papers, like bullet points. So we would have, because it was always a listening discussion, like we were listening to what people were saying, and we were just taking notes in these big papers. And if you compare, if you put the same question, let's say what colonialism means, of the same question of the 5 territories of all the dialogues, you would never know, other than because in Puerto Rico is in Spanish, but you would never know which one comes from what territory, because the content itself is so common and shared. And even when you go into the challenges that are faced because of the relationship with the US, yes, in Guam and Marianas, there was a lot of talk about the militarism, the relationship with the military. Yes, but there was a lot of talk in the Virgin Islands and in American Samoa about tourism and about what that means. But there is a very common threads of, there was mention of militarism in Puerto Rico because of what happened to us not that long ago. There was talk about tourism and about displacement in all of the territories. There was talk about climate disasters and how powerless many of us feel, all of us feel, because of climate, and how little power we have over the decisions that are being made that are affecting the climate around us, and so on. So it was really fascinating. Also, then in the report, we talk about the Summit on US Colonialism, which is what you went to. And it was just magical. And we go into what we worked
and
there.
I'll also, just to jump in there, I'll say thank you, Miguel, for a lot of the photos you took at the summit, which are throughout both of the reports. So thanks again for your help on that front.
Oh, no,
Yeah.
no problem. It was,
So if you don't see Miguel in the photos, it's because he's behind the camera.
Exactly.
I agree that it was magical, just to, so rare to have so many people from different ends of the empire together. It felt it was exciting. I mean, I hope one day to visit Puerto Rico, the US Virgin Islands, American Samoa, but you Right to Democracy made it possible that I could gather for a few days and I could talk story. I could talk story, like, and not just like brief, not just sitting on a panel with them, but to hear like long stories and jokes too, and also see some dances too. The American Samoa crew danced and sang quite a bit, you know. And so beautiful. But oh, please continue. Please continue.
No, yes, you're so right. There was immediate friendship and solidarity built because it felt like family, and that is not a lie. and then being able to present. We did strategy. We created a working agenda by creating a cross-territorial coalition. Can you go down a little bit so we can show the viewers? So based on the principle of solidarity in Alpha Maolek, we worked on different themes that worked on policy, worked on education, litigation. We worked on media. You can go down. And indigenous laws and rights. You can go down to create what was, you can go down. So I just want to show the coalition, the cross-territorial coalition. And so this coalition is organized cross-territorially from the participants of the summit, but we are ready now to start inviting new guests to be part of the coalition. So somebody that is in the coalition can invite new guests into the coalition. And we are divided in 5 working committees that are working their 5 strategies, like that it is expressed in the report. And so we are very in a momentum where we can move forward, and we're looking for resources. That's most of the part of our work right now, looking for resources to be able to build this coalition, and grow this coalition, and that we can again meet next year. And Miguel, you were not in the last cross-territorial coalition meeting, but we are very hopeful because we have identified possible sources of funding to be able to do summit number 2 and to be able to present the work that the coalition is doing, including a people's declaration on self-determination, equity, and democracy in the territories. So it's all very exciting work, and we're just really glad to be able to share it with you all.
And I'll just add, if you can stay on the vision, one of the things that really came out of the summit that was very moving was, we had folks at the summit from across all different ages, generations, backgrounds, professions. And one of the things that came from some of the elders there was recognizing the importance of seeing this change, quote, achieved in our lifetime. So, this is work that has an urgency to it. This isn't just an abstract concept that maybe one day will get resolved. This is something that people at the summit, and that what we heard during our listening tour, and that now has been embodied by the folks we're partnering with in the mission and vision, is this sense of urgency, demanding action, denormalizing the idea that it's okay to have colonies or second-class citizens. And that was just another kind of powerful thing that, frankly, moved folks, including yours truly, to tears to hear people talk about it in this way. And that's the emotion that just came out, and the solidarity that was built. And I thought your photos really captured that really well. If you keep scrolling, I think we have a slide of some of the folks. Yeah, you see these just different folks engaging at the summit. You'll recognize some of them: MJ Kenga from Guam, Serenetta Dog, Zeno de Languerero from the Northern Mariana Islands. Folks know him. And just others from across the Pacific, the Virgin Islands, the Caribbean, Dr. Ken. Everybody bringing their own perspectives, views, sometimes differing. And that's one of the things at Right to Democracy and in the coalition that we really embrace. It's like, what does right to democracy mean? It can mean something different to everybody. We don't have a monopoly on what that means. And we encourage people to to recognize their differences while respecting them, and working towards building common ground. And I think that's what ultimately was most powerful at the summit, was the trust people were able to build with each other, the solidarity, and now growing that into something more as we look ahead to the future. It's just really exciting.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, yeah, looking at just all these pictures, this is so cool. It really is, just to see so many people gathered from the territories. No, and to build a movement in which everybody's voice, and yeah, everybody's voice matters, in which there's space for every territory. And that's, for me, that's what makes Right to Democracy such an important group, is that in the past, a lot of organizing, it was really just sort of like, how do you how do you fit in America? Like, it's just about like, your territory needs to fit in America. The one size fits all, right? And that was always the problem that territories had with the US Congress, is that it's just, you need to you need to figure out how you're going to fit into us. But the territories, especially after the Insular Cases has put so many territories at arm's length for 120 years, it's kind of like, don't we deserve the chance to have a say at this point? Don't we deserve a chance to decide what we want at this point? After you've um it's like a bad Lifetime movie. We've been we've been put on, we've been treated like this for so long. I think at this point we deserve to treat ourselves, as I hear people say nowadays, treat ourselves to some self-determination.
Well, definitely, we deserve that since the beginning. Like, this is not something that we should have suffered since the Spanish just thought about crossing the sea and invaded all of our lands. But I think that what makes it different for us is that we are able, by working together, to elevate the conversation in ways that make the typical zero-sum mentality that existed. And I have to say it's typical because Puerto Ricans know how divisive politics are in Puerto Rico because of our colonial situation. Now we recognize also how divisive is between us and other territories. So they pit us against each other. The colonial reality and the economy it creates, extractive economy it creates, pits us against each other within the territories and among the territories. And to top that, you have a typical US narrative, which is, it's our fault that we haven't decided yet what we want to do, or we don't have our act together, or we don't fit into. It's always a responsibility that is brought towards us. So by elevating the conversation and canceling the things that divide us and concentrating the things that unite us, there's this thing that one of our team members says, Eduardo, what unites us in the coalition is what doesn't divide us. So let's concentrate not in what divides us, let's concentrate in what unites us, and to be able to push together with our partners and colleagues and affinity groups, that there's the potential of so many. We're talking about more than 6 million Puerto Ricans in the US, but also Black Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, and affinity groups of all these three populations that will identify with the fact of what's happening in the territories and be offended that the US democracy is still carrying on a model of colonialism, of of the 19th century still today. So I think that canceling that zero-sum mentality is what we bring that is a little bit different. We don't mind in Right to Democracy whatever organizations are doing to fight for self-determination, to fight for equity, or any way they frame it, as long as you're respectful to other mentalities, you can be part of this coalition, because this is about potentiating the individual work of all organizations, leaders that are working for equity, self-determination, and democracy in the territories.
And I think that's one of the ways, we manifest it in our work. We always love to come to your program, Miget, talk with you about these issues. You're very thoughtful, always bring in that historical perspective. Addie also, goes on podcasts of folks that have different perspectives, from you and folks in your audience. In Puerto Rico, she even kind of got some criticism from folks because she went on a pro-statehood podcast to talk with George Laws, who also, approaches these issues in a thoughtful way. And, we always recognize Right to Democracy doesn't take a position on political status. We want to bring people together. We want to focus on areas of common ground. And that we honestly have much more agreement than disagreement, even as those differences are often highlighted. And seeing, and in some ways, and Eddie, maybe you can speak more to this, especially in Puerto Rico, these issues are really sometimes even personally divisive, like between individuals and even sometimes family members. I know sometimes in Guam that can be the case too. It's not quite as strong. But when we kind of give people permission to talk about this without focusing on those divisions, to say, oh, what do we all agree on? What do you think about this? What do you think about, what does democracy mean? Or what does colonialism mean? Or how can you be included in a process of decolonization? Having these kinds of conversations that oftentimes people have never had in their lives in Puerto Rico. It's always, if we're gonna have a conversation, it's gonna be a fight. Like, you better bring a stick or something, because we're gonna go to blows. And instead it being this conversation, it's like, wow, at the end of it, we all feel better for having had it. We all feel identifying with each other. And to be able to do that across territories as well, I think it's just very empowering to folks who often feel frustrated that, why can't we get more traction on these issues? Why can't we have more people care about it? To be able to meet people who, maybe don't know a lot about Guam, or didn't even know that Guam existed before they had a chance to meet someone from there, and to realize they have so much in common, and that you can work together to bring about change, has just been a very powerful experience.
No.
Yes, definitely. It is a very, Neil said, if I could talk a little bit more about it, but the families, so in Puerto Rico, the party politics have typically been divided along status lines. So it is not Democrat versus Republican, or it's not conservative versus liberal. It's the party, there was usually three parties. One was pro-statehood, one was pro-independence, and one was the Commonwealth Party. So kind of like status quo party. But it has all evolved, and because of the different Supreme Court decisions and actions of the U.S. government, by Baello Madero versus Ela, where they decided that, but the Supreme Court decided that, yeah, they could discriminate against somebody that moved from Puerto Rico, would not receive supplemental security income that they received when they were living in the United States. And they allowed that to the Fiscal Control Board that was assigned by the US President and Congress to rule over Puerto Rico economic matters, and they can actually go over any law approved of the local government. So all these have been passing in the last few years. And I think there is change, big change happening. The polarization along status lines have become so relativized by Hurricane Maria, the earthquake, Baello versus Ella, the Fiscal Control Board, that right now, like Neil was saying, young people just want something different. And that there were, I mean, all of the groups that we had the dialogue with and participated on the summit were really grateful. But the young people, they were even more grateful to be able to speak on these matters without feeling the pang of what status result is the one that you favor. Because let me tell you, when you go to anywhere, when I go anywhere, the first question when they know that I'm Puerto Rican is, are you pro statehood or pro independence? What are you? It's like an identity. What are you? And I'm like, okay. So not being like hogged down on what the result of self-determination should be, but more focus on what the process should look like. That is what we are permitting by having these conversations. And now in the coalition, we are working on what does that process should look like. Because yes, it is, and I think it's very true. There's some concern, but okay, so you guys want to do self-determination. What does that mean? What do you eat that with? Well, I think, and we think, and Neil thinks, and the coalition thinks, that this is something that we should define ourselves. Like this is something that should not be imposed. And of course, that's what we're working on right now. And hopefully we'll have something for the next summit.
Oh, wonderful. No, thank you. Thank you so much. I wanted to thank you so much for I like the way that that you're talking about this issue, and it's really because I think that in recent, you know, and there's every territory has their own conversation around these issues, but there's definitely ways that there needs to be evolutions of this. And so even if there's energy in some ways, there's definitely a need to inject and evolve in others. So like, for example, somebody looking at all five islands may say that, well, there's more activity here versus here, or it's a lot more pronounced here versus here. But it may be, for example, as I hear both of you saying, that it may be very pronounced here, but it also may be stuck in a certain way here, that everybody talks about it, but it's not going to go anywhere, even if it's very visible here. And so just because it's on everybody's t-shirt, you are team this or you are team that, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get any further along in that. And so in Guam, you know, it may be something similar where Guam has a decolonization commission. There's, you know, groups that have been educating for a very long time, but there's also ways in which this can evolve and it can enhance too. And so I definitely appreciate sort of this idea of, you know, of evolving the process, focusing on that. Now, I do want to give you a last chance here to talk about, because it was just last week, I believe, that Right to Democracy hosted this virtual panel on indigeneity in the U.S. territories. And so you've mentioned that next year there might be another summit, but you know, I want to give you a chance to talk about any other things that you have planned or any other things that you might want to pitch or let people know about. I've posted on the live stream to the link to where you can follow them on Instagram, Right to Democracy, where they post more updates. But this was a wonderful conversation because, you know, whether you know, you may think about indigeneity on one, from one side, but it's always important to hear about it in another perspective. But then also how that indigeneity encounters the American legal system. And so that was interesting to hear from 5 different perspectives across sort of the U.S. empire. And so,
Yes.
oh yes, so
Sorry,
to add
I was
to
just
Neil.
gonna say that that flyer is outdated in the
Oh,
sense
that's right.
that
There was one more.
it's missing the person from the Virgin Islands that we got at last minute, but we did get somebody from the Virgin Islands, and just very glad to be able to give voice to the indigenous people, not only from the Pacific that are so present and even still speak their languages, but in the Caribbean, our language was completely replaced by Spanish in Puerto Rico and by English in Danish first, and then English in the Virgin Islands. And it was good to show that this eyes, this face is as indigenous as your eyes and your face, and that we have all this relationship also across all the territories. So there is that indigenous blood that is there, and culture that is there, and words that is there. Like Bruce Tyrone, he said in the beginning of the dialogue, the feminine deities, the moon, and how the feminine goddess, spirits, or whatever you want to call it, are portrayed in each one of the territories: the Chamorro, the Carolinian, the Samoan, in the Taino, in the Caribbean, which are the same in the Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. It's fascinating. So we are closer than we think in that way. And also to present the possibility of these dialogues that we're going to keep having in the future. We are planning a surprise. I don't should I say, so we're trying to do a dialogue of young influencers as our next dialogue. So please be on the lookout. I think that's another place where you see a lot of action that is not being talked about, and having them speak to each other from different territories will be great. So that's something we're aiming for, and we're aiming to have a dialogue at least once a month, or close to that. So just please be on the lookout to our Instagram, our Facebook, or our LinkedIn, and I think we have Twitter too. And it's #2 democracy, #2 democracy, and you'll find us.
And I'd just like
There
to
you
say
go.
thanks, Maguette, for having us on. My folks actually just visited from Guam, Dr. Bill and Nancy Weare. So it was fun to have them visit. And tonight I had some Nancy on my fried rice. So I was feeling the flavor of the island. So very nice to be able to connect with you this evening and morning in Guam.
No, and thank you to the both of you. It was a pleasure to start off sort of July, especially as July is a time where the United States, July 4th, right? It is a complicated time in the territories. And so I thought it would be perfect to have Right to Democracy on as as we start July. And so thank you for accepting the invitation. And remember, the links to Right to Democracy, their website and their social media are on the live stream. Check out their Building a Movement plan. Keep on the lookout for their regular virtual panels that they have. You know, if if you are Chamorro, if you are from Guam in the Marianas, their network is a way that you can get information on what is happening elsewhere, to our brothers and sisters, Imanyet Luta, on the other ends of the American territories. And so your social media feed is not going to give you stuff very easily, the algorithm is not going to tell you what's happening in the US Virgin Islands very easily. It's not going to tell you what's happening in American Samoa. You have to hunt for that information. But that's the great thing about right to democracy, is that they are making those connections. And so, Sidus Masinu Hamzu and all the work that you are doing, this is it for the episode of Fanachu for this week. Para Hamzu todos ni umeiga para umeikungok, Sidus Masi Adjos.